Well, anyway, I'm Michael Smith. In 1969, I was Lieutenant Michael Smith, XO of Charlie Battery, 1st and 92nd Field Artillery in Vietnam.
Okay. And let's start at the beginning. Tell me where you're from and how you got involved in the military.
Okay. I grew up in Texas and put in some college in Texas back in the 60s. And after my wife and I were married, we had taken our honeymoon to Colorado, so we decided we wanted to live in Colorado. So we moved from Texas to Colorado with the intent of going to veterinary school here in Fort Collins, Colorado. Moved up in the mountains and lived in a small cabin, sort of a hippie atmosphere. And about that time, the Vietnam War was intensifying, and I began to wonder about my draft status. So I phoned the draft board in Muleshoe, Texas, where I grew up, and they said that it was highly likely I would be drafted. So we began to talk about what other options there were. And I had a friend who had come back from Vietnam who was a lieutenant, who'd gone to officer candidate school. He advised me that if you could, you'd have a nicer life, he said, as an officer versus being an enlisted man, pay and the way you were treated, that sort of thing. So I decided to see if I could do that. So we visited a recruiter here in Fort Collins. He assured me that if I was drafted that I wouldn't get to go to OCS because they didn't favor draftees, they wanted people who were volunteers. So I subsequently signed up for a 3-year term. Went to basic training in Fort Bliss, Texas in the summer. From Fort Bliss, they shipped me to Fort Sill to artillery AIT. I guess what some of these things are now.
Yeah, there's enough acronyms
Yeah.
out there.
Artillery AIT. And at that point, I had applied for OCS and I was told I would be able to go. And then the Army changed the rule and said now in order to go to officer candidate school, you needed a college degree. So at that point, they learned I could type, and I was made a battery clerk in a training unit there and spent about the better part of the next year as a battery typist, and with a very stern first sergeant who actually made a pretty good clerk out of me. Wouldn't accept any errors. In any event, as the war intensified again, apparently they needed more people and they dropped that restriction on going to officer candidate school. And next thing I knew, I was in OCS in the class there. 6 months of OCS in Fort Sill, artillery. I graduated in July of '68 and spent most of the next year training, well, we called them cannon cockers then, and Fort Sill, training artillery crews who were then shipped out largely to Vietnam. In July of '69, I got my orders to Vietnam, and took steps to, before they sent me to Vietnam, they had this program that they would send you first to jungle survival training school in Panama. So in June and early July of '69, I went to jungle survival school in Panama and came back home, and from there shipped out to Vietnam. Arrived in Vietnam in July of '69, spent some time going through courses they offered you relating to gunnery and firebase training relevant to Vietnam, and then was assigned to 1st and 92nd Artillery, and from there became the XO of Charlie Battery.
That jungle survival training in Panama, that's the first I've ever heard of anybody doing that. Was that just for part of the officers' training, or did everybody go through that?
No, it was specific for officers.
Oh, okay.
And I'm not sure how it happened. There were about 100 of us, and you spent 3 weeks in the jungle, the mire, and the muck of Panama. I was supposed to stiffen us up for what you might encounter in Vietnam.
Right.
As I understand, I think Ron Ross also, not Ron Ross, I think Ron Ross might have gone to that same school.
Okay.
But from a field artillery standpoint, I don't know that it did me much good,
Right.
but at least part of my training. So.
So you were in those various positions for almost a couple of years before you went to Vietnam. Is that right?
Well, when I arrived in Vietnam, I was a first lieutenant. I spent my second lieutenant year. At that time, you got promoted after 1 year in grade. So I got my promotion to first lieutenant and then went to Nam. And then when I left Vietnam, shortly thereafter, I was promoted to captain.
Okay. And you had mentioned you were when you went to Vietnam. What was your rank and what was your responsibility?
I was executive officer. At that point, I was a first lieutenant, and I suppose that's what the slot required.
And what's a role of an executive officer?
Well, the Fire Direction Center would fall under the XO.
Okay.
One other officer, the FDO, Fire Direction Officer, who largely lived in the Fire Direction Center, and so as XO, and especially in a split platoon situation, which we were in, where they'd take two guns and send them off to support an infantry operation somewhere, send the other two guns to somewhere else. It was a way of subdividing an artillery battery into, I suppose, a more useful method as opposed to the old days where 6 guns lined up all together and offered fire support.
Okay.
And we were also largely air mobile. We moved in by helicopter and moved in and out by helicopter for the most part.
Okay. So the guns and everything just flew where they were needed, kind of a thing.
Chinook would pick the troops up, and then a sky crane would pick up the howitzer, which weighed 16,000 pounds, and then some more Chinooks slinging ammo and take us all to the top of some little hill, like Firebase Cape, set it down, and away you went.
Okay. And you mentioned Charlie Battery. Charlie Battery was the artillery. Is that correct?
Well, there's four. I believe there were 4 batteries in a battalion, A, B, C, and D, and we were in Charlie Battery, and there's usually a headquarters battery, sort of an administrative function, and the other lettered batteries all had guns.
Okay.
Generally, the original complement would have been 6 howitzers per battery. And in our battery, Charlie Battery, we were split into 2 at one fire base and 2 at another, and 2 on Kate at that particular time.
Okay.
Susan, Annie, and Kate, 3 fire bases, each with 2 guns from our unit, each with an officer in charge, and a FDO officer also present there.
And just so we know, and like I say, the audience for this is going to be all over the board, but mostly people who didn't serve, don't know what's going on. Could you explain what a fire base is?
Fire base in the classic Vietnam sense was a way of deploying artillery to support generally some sort of infantry action. In our case, the units of the 4th Division might be told they're going into a certain valley, and they would be making sweeps looking for the enemy. And so to support them, if they got into major trouble, you'd position a couple of howitzers nearby, and as the infantry got into some sort of difficulty, then they could call for fire. There would be an artillery officer traveling with the infantry who was skilled in, FO was the term, forward observer. He would call our unit, give us his location, and then we would offer them whatever fire support they needed, as on demand, I suppose I might say.
Okay. And so was Kate your first destination then when you went to Vietnam?
No, Kate was, let's see, I got there in July. We didn't go to Kate, as I recall, until late September. I think it was late September. We were on several fire bases, so the dates tend to run together after a while. We were there almost 6 weeks before things changed and the base was attacked. Most of the time, we were in one place for 2-3 weeks tops. A few of them we moved by truck, and others we moved by helicopter. And in the case of Kate, we were flown in by helicopter. So.
And around this time when you're at various fire bases, what's the state of affairs, I guess, with the the war in general? Is there a lot of action going on that you're seeing at these fire bases? Is it fairly calm, or what kind of resistance are you running into? And
Well, the combat activity, sporadic, and actually it could be quite boring because if you weren't in an area that was hot, so to speak, then you could spend a lot of time just waiting on fire missions. And generally, artillery crews love to shoot. That's what they were trained to do, and there's a certain amount of excitement to shooting a 90-pound shell several miles, and the crews were good at what they did, and they enjoyed shooting as opposed to just sitting and waiting. Sitting and waiting generally equated with having to do routine chores that weren't as exciting as shooting the howitzers.
right.
In the case of Kate, we spent a good bit of time with not much to do. And to our knowledge, that was because not much was happening out in the jungle.
And what's describe, I guess, who's on Kate, because there's more than just the American soldiers, right?
Okay, our purpose was we're artillery support. That being the case, we don't really have the option of providing our own fire base support, defensive fire base support. So the technique was to put an artillery platoon there and then attach a special forces led contingent of CIDGs, which were Montagnard soldiers, native Vietnamese soldiers, but different in the respect that I suppose you could term them as, in America you might call them hillbillies, but they were great little guys in terms of fighting. And we had about 100 of those as security around Firebase Kate, so that if we were engaged in fire missions for the infantry, we didn't also have to focus our attention on defense of the firebase itself.
Okay.
So it seemed like a very efficient method of both units accomplishing their mission.
Right. And Kate was in support along with other fire bases of a larger base. Is that right? And they were the kind of like the outpost to support.
Well, we were positioned on 3 different hilltop areas in that particular area of Vietnam, and I no longer recall what military unit was accomplishing what sort of sweep or military objective was going on. We just knew we were there to support any artillery fire that was needed for units on the ground. That's what we were there for.
Okay.
And we were positioned in such a way that we could protect each other. One fire base could shoot for another, and the reverse, of course.
Okay.
And as
So-
part of that, as when you set a fire base into motion, as soon as you get set up as best you can, then you fire in defensive targets. So Kate would call Annie and give them coordinates around our base and have Annie fire smoke rounds and walk those in as close as possible to where you wanted them. So if you were attacked, then it wasn't a matter of saying we need help and we'll need to walk the fire in as close as well. You had these pre-planned targets all shot in, so to speak, that were ready to go. Each unit did that for the other unit. So if there was a large-scale attack, you were a little bit ahead of the game already.
So at this point, I'll just jump in. At this point, there's not much happening at Kate. You're fully set up, but there's no combat action going on, so everybody's kind of in waiting, basically.
We were set up. We'd have an occasional someone to report there was some movement on the trail, and you'd fire a round out. And then there were a few what are called H&I missions, harassment and interdiction. So if you chose a particular trail in the jungle and said there's likely to be somebody here to keep the enemy off guard, then maybe at 3 a.m. in the morning you'd fire out a round at that area. So if you happened to be there, it was bad news. If you didn't happen to be there, it was a way of keeping them off guard also, since we picked the targets like that. So we fired a few H&Is. We kept the guns cleaned and oiled and ready to go. The fire base, compared to many of them I was on with the time we had, was a very orderly fire base. I recall that brass would come out and look at it, and it was a very neat fire base, and that's a tribute to the troops and keeping things as they should, very military. But again, it was kind of boring because that's about all we did. We
Right.
played a lot of volleyball. We had interchange with the SIGIs, our security groups, and the Special Forces folks that were there. There were two of those. So it was overall pleasant duty, I suppose you could say, in comparison, but at the other end, kind of boring also.
Right. And is there, throughout this time, is there any indication that that is going to change? I mean, I don't know if you get any advance notice that, hey, we see movement here or there, or is it just wait and see, see if your own patrols turn anything up, or is there ever any indication that something is about to happen, or?
Well, there were times on each fire base you'd receive a message that certain movement has been seen in your area, be more alert, in which case we would respond by being more alert. But in that particular area, I don't recall any information being passed on that there was a huge movement of troops afoot.
Right.
And of course, in the Army, there's the ever-present rumors of this, that, and the other.
Right. Okay, so take me to the time, at this time, I don't believe Bill Albrecht and Dan Pirelli are there. There's somebody else in those roles.
Well, Pirelli was there.
Oh, Pirelli was
Yeah.
there, okay. So I guess tell me a little bit about Dan Pirelli and the arrival of Bill Albrecht. And then I believe that coincides with when things drastically change.
Yeah, and that's a hard one for my memory. There's a Captain Barnum that was there, who I'm not familiar with their whole chain of command and their sequence in SF. There's a outpost nearby called Buprang, and that was a Special Forces outpost. And Captain Barnum said he'd be being replaced by another fellow, and Captain Albright showed up, but Dan Pirelli was with us during that time.
Okay.
And again, I don't recall the exact command structure of Special Forces and how many officers an enlisted person would be with a unit of that size or type. But the Barnum fellow moved out, and Captain Albright came in, and Dan Pirelli was already there. And shortly thereafter, we got our first activity on Ambush Hill, in which Bill Albright and some of the SF and SIGI folks responded to.
Can you tell me a little bit about how that changed life on Kate, and because things quickly escalated from that point forward, if I remember right.
Well, it certainly heightened our sense of urgency, I suppose. There wasn't that much we could do in our situation to change what we had already done. The guns are maintained, ready. We thought protected, heavily sandbagged, ammunition heavily sandbagged. FDC by then underground, generators protected. SIGIs were pretty well dug in all the way around the top of the hill. So short of mental alertness, I don't know that there was much more that we could have done, that we as artillery could have done. And I'm not well versed enough to know what, if anything, the Special Forces and the SIGIs should have done in that circumstance either.
So what does happen? You start taking incoming rounds, some mortar rounds, or what kind of kicks off the combat that ensues?
Well, as I recall, a patrol had gone out in the area of Ambush Hill, and they had begun taking fire. And of course, they let us know that. There's not much we could do at that stage with artillery. And of course, the call went out to our headquarters, and they sent out some helicopters, OH-1, little bubble-looking helicopter, a Loach, I believe the terminology was, Light Observation Aircraft Helicopter.
Okay.
A Loach came out, and Loaches were always followed by Cobras. And then a Cobra came out and shot some rockets down into that region there. And ultimately the security folks came back and said they had encountered some activity, and again, I suppose we were in heightened awareness. It's been so long, I don't remember exactly what we did or said around that time. And then the next morning, we woke up to a whoomp of a recoilless rifle shot around and managed to go through the sandbag wall and hit one of the howitzers. And at that point, I went out and to see what was happening. I was able to climb up near a Connex container so I could see, and had a small radio there and began to call for fire from the other fire bases. And of course, Captain Albright and the Siggy forces were watching heavily all the way around the fire base there.
And so is that howitzer, was that knocked out of commission?
And that howitzer was knocked out. It took out part of the sight mechanism also. And as I recall, I don't think the breech would have worked either. You would have been able to open it and put a shell in it.
And this is a 155?
155, yeah.
Okay. But you have one.
We had two 155s. Those were largely for support of infantry units in the area. And then we had a 105 attached to us from the 5th to the 22nd, which is there largely for either more close-in fire or direct fire. A 105 comes with a shell called a beehive, and the shell weighs about 30 pounds, and this particular shell is filled with like little finishing nails, about 8,000 of them. And when it exits the muzzle, it spreads out in a fan and literally kills anything nearby.
Yeah, it
So,
sounds like a wicked.
oh, a wicked thing, yeah. So we had that for defense, and it was positioned on the east side of the hill, facing the most likely or the easiest approach to the fire base. It was pointed right down the hill there.
Okay.
Now, shortly after the gun was taken out, in the activity that's going on, as I was coming out of my bunker, and in the process of running out of the bunker and putting my helmet on, I still recall glancing towards an open clearing that was almost level with or slightly below the top of our fire base, and seeing some movement and a flash, and then a rather large explosion went off, and I was blown back into the bunker, and not knowing what was going on. And it came out, and of course I'd gotten hit in the head here, and I was bleeding as head wounds do, and the medic, Doc, and unfortunately none of us can remember what Doc's name is. Doc looked me over and said, if you were out a little bit, then you should probably get out of here. So after things settled down and we began getting air support in to target that hill, then later in the day then I was medevaced.
So where did you go to when you were medevaced out of there?
Bami-Toohey, as I recall, a field hospital in Bami-Toohey,
Okay.
which was 40, 50 miles away. And the distances escape me anymore. I have a little map downstairs still.
Okay. Yeah, that'd be great to see. And this is that same day you said where you inspected the howitzer and that got knocked out. This is that same day?
Same day.
Okay.
So, as I recall, this happened fairly early in the morning, daylight certainly, and then by afternoon, I would have left on a helicopter.
Okay.
And at that point, John Kerr would have remained behind. And now the unit would have been left with one artillery officer on board, which by definition requires that somebody else be sent out to replace me.
Okay. And John Kerr was?
He was my fire direction officer.
Okay. And so you're, the FDC, that's where you were stationed in the FDC, and then John Kerr would be there as well?
No,
Correct?
you don't keep both people in the same one spot. So
Okay.
if you were to take a hit in the FDC and both officers are there, now you have no officers.
Okay.
So I had a separate command bunker, and John was with FDC.
Okay. So when you were medevaced out, then they sent in a replacement for you?
Yeah, and as I understand it, that would have been Ron Ross.
Okay,
Now, I didn't know Ron Ross, where he was from, or what unit, or anything. All I knew back in Ban Me Toohey, picking up bits and pieces from, as I recall, it wasn't even my unit there, so I'm sort of an outsider listening to things that are happening in their headquarters there, that they were going to send somebody in. And I recall hearing that whoever it was only had a couple of weeks left, either in country or before he went on R&R or something. And they flew him out to take my place, and that would have been Ron Ross.
okay. So you at this point, I mean, obviously you have the head injury, but they fix you up enough that you're able to at least ask, or I don't know, how are you able to kind of, you said you're getting bits and pieces of what's going on there. Somebody just informing you of this?
Yeah,
Or?
yeah, just scuttlebutt. Bammy 2 is not a huge place, nor was it a huge hospital. So I began trying to find out as much as I could about what was going on. Meanwhile, things were intensifying on Kate. And all of that information, I don't really know because I wasn't there.
Right. But do you recall what the general sense is? Are you getting enough information to know what's happening there?
Supposedly that was a big force at that point, not just the initial contact we had, as I recall, was more of a testing or some small unit, trying to gain some casualties on us, and nothing in terms of a large-scale attack.
Right.
I don't ever recall the sense of that during the short time period that I was there at the beginning.
Right. But it became apparent, obviously, that that's what it was, or?
Yeah, as it went along, and began to get more and more reports of the shelling and all the air support that was going in there, and yeah, that was much bigger than anyone thought.
And when did you learn, unfortunately, not only because his timing was just a couple weeks left, unfortunately, Ron Ross, things didn't go so well for him. Did you learn that while you were in Bambi-Tuet?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Can you tell me about that? When that word reached you, or what your understanding of that situation was?
Well, all I can specifically remember hearing it 45 years later is that a round, he was in to get into the old Fire Direction Center, or I said that the Fire Direction Center went underground, and yet the Connex container that we initially began with was still there. It was still useful as a defensive structure. It had sort of a L-shaped entrance, so that if a shell did hit it, it didn't spray shrapnel into the container, into the contents.
Right.
And as I understand it, he was moving through that L-shape, and a round went off, and his flak jacket was unzipped here at the neck, and he took a piece of shrapnel on the neck, and not much you can do about a neck wound.
Right. Right.
And he bled to death.
And at that point, was he replaced, or did
I don't know the time frame in which he would have been replaced. Then I somehow heard that they would be sending a new lieutenant out, which I suspect would be Maurice Zollner. I think he was new in country, but I don't know for sure.
okay?
My memory says that he was kind of new in country, because I remember thinking, damn, the guy just got here, and now he's going into all this.
Thrown into the fire right away.
Yeah, yeah. And then at that point, I began having regrets for ever having left, because not because of any hero thing, but because of it's your group and your unit, and you know the people, and you know how things are organized and how things are done, and it just makes more sense for somebody totally familiar with that to be there, as opposed to a new person just being dropped into it.
Right.
And that's a position that Maurice found himself in, and I understand he did an incredible job.
And of course, your leaving was dictated to you. That wasn't your choice to leave, right? They said, "Hey, you're injured. You have to go."
Yeah, as I recall,
Yeah.
and again, at that juncture, it seemed more like a testing thing because it happened. Things went quiet again in terms of several hours there, short of aircraft support coming out and blowing away the jungle. There was nothing additional really that happened that particular day. So it seemed like, okay, we have a little test shot here. You should go get yourself looked after. And I had to be strapped on the head there, and off we go.
So at what point do you think, hey, I'm going back, or does that opportunity arise that you can even consider that? How's all that come into play?
It was late one evening, and I had heard that Ross had been killed and that they were going to send somebody else. And by then, I suppose they'd already sent Zollner. But then I began to think, and I no longer recall exactly when John Kerr left that week, but it must have been something to do with when John left, and that would have left again one artillery officer on the base. So I thought, if somebody needs to go back, it might as well be me, since it's my unit, and I know more about what's happening there than anybody knew. And we've already sent one new fellow in, and he's dead. And a second new fellow in, who by then I had learned had been wounded in the nose or hit in the head also. So I went to the colonel and asked him if I could go back. And he said, "You sure you want to do this?" Yeah. So he said, "All right, in the morning." This is about 3 a.m. I wrote my wife a letter and flew out sometime the next morning. I don't recall exactly what time, but flew out the next morning with a 50 caliber machine gun and some ammo and some water, and put me on a slick, and away we went back to Cape.
So at this point, you obviously know fighting's intensifying there, and you know the situation. You said you wrote your wife a letter. I mean, what is your expectation? Is there an expectation that, I mean, I'm going into a pretty hot area, I may not be coming back, or but I'm going to do my best to get these guys out. What's your mindset at that point?
Well, that's pretty much what I told her in my letter. So I wrote her a letter almost every day when I was in Nam, and I still have all those, or she has all those. And I reread the one from that night, and that's essentially what it says, that I feel badly about Ron Ross having gotten it in my place, and that if somebody should go back, it should be me.
Do you remember what day this is when you are heading back, or when you do get back to Cape?
No, I think it was a Thursday, but I don't remember sure. If I looked at my letter, I might be able to sort it out. So.
Okay. Is it difficult getting into Cape at this point?
Yeah. Yeah, from everything I understood, there were points in time where choppers couldn't go in at all, and by then they had shot down one helicopter and killed all four people aboard. And it was hot, so, and I remember flying into the base. We were hugging the treetops, and many of the pilots, I read what's written now, and they have names, but at that time they're just people sitting in a helicopter. You can't even see what their name is. You get on the helicopter, they talk to you over the intercom, and away you go, and then you jump out. So I don't really know who anyone is in terms of what's going on, and there's no way I can ask much about what's happening there, what intensity. They just said, we're going in fast, and you're going to have so many seconds to get the hell out, and they come swooping in at tree top level, and you start hearing popping and shooting and this sort of stuff, and he slid it right into the top of the hill there, and kicked out the 50 caliber machine gun, which turned out to be fairly useless. Didn't have some sort of tool associated with it, and some other supplies there, and then jumped out of the chopper. They didn't sit down, they just got close enough that I could jump out, and I landed in the generator pit, and it was a hard landing.
How far, when you say you're jumping out?
Oh, 6 feet or so.
Okay.
They didn't want to sit down on the ground. He said, we'll go in fast enough and you can get out, but we're not going to sit down. So,
right.
And then away they went. So.
Okay. So then you're back on base. What's the state of affairs at that time, and how has it changed, I guess, since the time you left? Is it in much worse condition?
Oh, talking to the troops, they're saying how they've had all this incoming fire and people are tired and worn out, and still in reasonable spirits. I wouldn't say they were hunkered down and frightened. They were doing the best they could under the situation.
And do you have any discussions with Captain Albrecht or anybody else at that time to understand, what the plan is going forward, if there was a plan?
Yeah, well, recognize that I went back on the last day we were on the base. I think it was in the mornings when I arrived, maybe somewhere around between 8 and noon that I arrived. And at that point, there was still a heavy air support coming in, jets and fast movers and all this sort of stuff. And so I backtrack for a second here. Well, no. The three of us met and talked about the situation. At that point, both guns were knocked out. All three guns were knocked out, I guess. I don't recall ever seeing the 05 operate anymore.
And this is you, Albrecht?
And Zollner.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And we're discussing what the possibilities are, and Bill told us about there was supposed to be some sort of relief force that's making their way towards us, and there's discussion in the FDC over the radio with his unit, our unit, and we eventually discussed leaving. That from a usefulness standpoint, you got a fire base with a whole bunch of people on it, with none of the equipment is useful anymore. So why would you want to stay there? And at that point, I think also they had been again chipping away at Susan and Annie. So we discussed walking off of the thing, and pretty much agreed that we're all for that, and asked for permission to do so. And initially, we were told no, that we would have to stay there. And then we discussed it further and decided that that just didn't make any sense, that we were going to leave that night. And then shortly after that, I guess, through him talking to his superiors and all, then we eventually got the word, okay, it's all right to do an E&E. And when you do that, you'll try to link up with this Mike force that'll be positioned somewhere nearby.
Let me interrupt you and back up to where you were seeking permission to evacuate, and that was denied. Did that seem very strange at the time? Because you had just described you're basically on this base that doesn't have any of the things that it's supposed to have, none of the artillery and that, it's kind of useless, but yet they're saying, no, you have to stay there. It seems kind of back-asswards to me.
Yeah, well, but that's as I recall. It was, what? We can't leave? You want us to stay here? And one of the lieutenant colonels, after this whole thing was all over, and I was back in Pleiku, one of the lieutenant colonels in my unit and I don't remember why we were talking, but he told me, artillerymen have been found dead by their pieces. You never leave your artillery piece. I took that as an admonishment that I should have stayed there and died.
Wow.
I think, I'm not sure he made it back from Vietnam. I think he was killed in a plane crash, but I remember thinking, well, I guess I don't quite follow that. It's one thing if you're standing by your piece and it's usable, but
Right.
to stay there and die just because you're an artilleryman? Not me.
Yeah, it doesn't make a lot of sense.
But in any event, first they were saying no, and we sort of collectively decided that we're all in favor of going out anyway. What are they going to do to us? Send us to Vietnam? I think somebody might have even said that. So we decided that we would leave, and then we actually got the word that we could leave. And then on the heels of that was Spooky 4-1, was that gunship that came out and stayed on station for them much of the week there. And of course, it was great having those guys fly around and mowing the jungle down with those miniguns that they have. And he had told them that he would be back that night, and they came out late in the evening and provided support for the greater part of the night for them. He said he would be back, and I guess something had happened, and it's getting along towards nightfall, and there's no Spooky, and we wanted Spooky to protect us as we left the place. And then it eventually decided that we're Spooky or no Spooky, we're going to have to leave tonight, because there was enough rumbling around the different parts of the fire base that it was, according to Bill, it was obvious that they were going to make a big push. So I remember it getting just about when it was getting dark, then over the radio comes Spooky 401. This is Spooky 401. It was like the cavalry coming over the hill.
So that made a huge difference when they're in the air, as I understand it.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, these guys, it's amazing. It can just mow the jungle down. I mean, like a lawnmower. It's incredible the amount of rounds that comes out of those things. But so now we had our support to walk off the hill, and it came time to destroy as much as we could. So we have thermite grenades, and you pop a thermite grenade and it burns several thousand degrees, and set one on top of the FADAC computer for the gunnery, and it'll just disappear, just melt its way right down into the unit. Toss them down the tubes of the howitzers, inactive and certainly inactive once you weld them together using a thermite grenade. Destroyed as many things as we thought might be useful to the enemy. And folks are instructed to take as little as possible, but try not to leave anything behind that was of value intelligence-wise. And I don't know how much use that was, but
Right.
we all gathered up our belongings, and then shortly after dark, we started marching off the hill. As we left the hill, somehow or another, someone tripped one of our own flares. And of course, we all spread out flat on the side of the hill there, waiting for something to happen, and oddly enough, nothing happened. The flare burnt, went out. I remember trying to get as much into a little depression as I could, and nothing happened. And we got up again and moved on into the jungle. And at that point, Albright's in charge, and Albright's had given us good instructions about what to do and how to do it. And us artillery guys were kind of all in a line, moving out into the jungle. And at some point near Ambush Hill, a machine gun starts going off, and everybody's down and scattered, and we got split up. And it's been so long now that I don't remember how we all ultimately got back together, but bit by bit, we did all get back together and started marching again through the jungle there. And I don't remember the times or how long it took or anything. I just remember being incredibly tired. And I also remember at one point, there was sort of a fork in the trail. There was just enough light that you could kind of see a bit. There was sort of a fork in the trail, and you just followed the next person up into that fork, and then we lost one guy. We lost Norton. And I just speculate that perhaps Norton, somehow the line was strung out a little bit at that point, and he went right and he should have gone left. He's the one fellow that didn't show up at the other end.
And nobody ever knows.
Nobody ever knows what happened to him. Again, Army's filled with rumors. There was a rumor that the next day a guy in a GI uniform was seen in a clearing near the base there, and they sent a chopper out, and it went down and hovered to see if it was him, but it was a setup. It was a Vietnamese wearing a U.S. uniform, and they tried to shoot the chopper down the way they went. Whether that happened or not, I don't really know. That's just that part of that rumor mill that goes down.
Right.
But he was classified eventually as MIA, and I think eventually changed to KIA. Getting together with the Mike Force again. Now we're in the jungle. We are artillerymen, and we're essentially, I like to think we're doing what we're told. Bill was doing a great job, and Bill and Dan of keeping things as organized as they could. And I remember him having to use a flashlight and talking to the mic force, and you're unsure of, is that them? Who are you talking to? Where are they? Are you getting set up? Whatever. But he managed to use a red flashlight somehow or another to get it sorted out that was actually the mic force that we were encountering there. And eventually we met up and rested for a little bit, and then began the march all the way into Buprang and got there sometime the next morning.
So how long did this take? This take almost 24 hours for you to go through the jungle? Or?
No, I'd say more like, 10, 12.
Oh, okay.
We left shortly after dark. The whole idea was to leave just after dark. Have what cover we could have. And I don't remember exactly how far it is to Buprang, but it was certainly over hill and dale.
Yeah.
And then to find the mic force and then have all of those people and us move that far, it was at least several clicks to Buprang, maybe a lot more clicks than that. But and when we got to Buprang, then I'm the artillery guy. I no longer have anything to do there. Colonel flew in to Buprang, loads me up on the chopper, and away we go. And he said, well, I'll take you back over the fire base here, let you see what it looks like now. So we flew over it, and the only thing I took off the hill was my camera.
Okay.
Every GI that got to Vietnam quickly went to the PX and bought a nice camera.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
My Miranda Sensor X. And I'd stuffed that in here in my flak jacket here and zipped it all up so that it wouldn't leave me, and maybe it would stop something too. But as we flew over it, I took a picture of the fire base there, which I still have. And
what was it? Was it totally destroyed? What did it look like?
all you could see were bomb craters and scattered pieces of bits. And just they bombed the hell out of it.
So after you left, did they physically come on base, or did they just continue to bomb it out? Or
as we left, I recall Spooky saying that there were guys coming up the other side and that they were all over the place, and then they started strafing the fire base behind us.
what do you mean strafing?
With the Spooky.
Oh, okay, okay. So, in this, when you're heading through jungle, we're talking dozens of American. How many people are we talking about?
I recall a head count of 33. Now, and I say 33, I think that's might have been how many I had in the unit. Now, I think Ken Hopkins was gone by then, John Kerr, but I think we had 33 guys, and somewhere between 25 and 33 walked off the hill. And Sigis, as I recall, there were about 100 of the Sigis, and Albright and Pirelli.
And the Sigis, the mountain, those are the Montagnards?
Yeah, civilian irregular defense group. A lot easier to say Sigi.
Yeah. So they were on this E&E with you?
Oh yeah, they were our security.
Okay. So how do you keep, I mean, it sounds almost pitch dark. How do you keep 100 and some people together moving quietly and only lose one person?
Well, there was some light. There was.
Okay.
I recall Terry Malvestuto. He's dead now. But Terry Malvestuto and I were at the end of the artillery contingent, and then there were Sigis behind us. And that's why I speculate that Norton may have missed a turn somehow or another, and he went this way, and then we all went right on by him because of our position there. So we had Albright and Pirelli out front, or maybe Pirelli in the rear, but Sigis in the front and Sigis in the back, and the artillery guys in the middle. And initially you were supposed to try to hold on to the guy in front of you there, their webbing or something so you maintained a line of people.
Somebody, and I cannot remember who told me, said something about putting something on their hands that it was glowing, and I was like, well, what's glowing? And they said,
Yeah.
well, it's just the...
Yeah, something about a plant, or
Yeah.
I read that also. I don't remember anything like that.
Okay,
That,
'cause it sounded
that doesn't mean
amazing.
it didn't happen. I just don't remember anything about it.
Okay, because when they originally said, I thought, you mean something that the planes are dropping is glowing? And they said, no, just the organic.
It's like a plant or something that you could touch and smear that on the guy in front of you. I can't say yes or no. I certainly didn't encounter any plants that shine.
Okay. So, when you said the groups got split up at one point, there was a plan? Didn't somebody say there's a plan? We're going to go up to this point and go right or go left, and you wound up doing the opposite? Was that when people got split up? Or I want to get my order of events here right.
Well, shortly after we entered the jungle, to move off the fire base, it was somewhat open, grassy, and then you moved into the tree line. And we were on one side or other of Ambush Hill, because the speculation was if you were going to set something up, that's where you'd set it up. As we went into that part of the jungle, not too long after we entered the jungle, this machine gun started firing with green tracers. And I don't think we used green. In any event, that's when people scattered. And then there was a point in time where we began to talk to each other and whisper. And little by little came back together. And I don't remember how it all would have happened in that, but of course everybody is afraid. And little by little we got back together. And then largely stayed together until we found the Mike Force.
And when you mentioned Albrecht with his red flashlight, was that was a point when you?
That was at a point in time trying to contact the Mike Force.
Okay.
You know they're there, and in the military there's a lot of when you're trying to talk to somebody, but radios can be quite loud in the jungle. Then you do a thing, you just break squelch twice would be the thing. If you hear me break squelch twice, and you know the guy's listening to you.
Okay.
In his case, it was a red light. It'll be a red light, or what color is the light, and little by little you establish that the other person is who they say they are.
Okay. I wanted to ask you about a few people. Ken Hopkins, who I talked, Ken Hopkins, who I talked to. Were you? And the reason I'm asking is I get a lot of recounts, and I get a lot of recounts that are pretty matter of fact. Here's what we did. And Ken was one person who I know he had a difficult time with it there, was shipped out, and he kind of exposed a little bit of, hey, we're dead tired. It's been 3 days since we slept. This is wearing on us, and a little bit of the emotion that was going on and how difficult it was. Were you around when Ken had his breakdown, for lack of a better term? You weren't around for that. Okay. Anything? Okay, aside from him specific, can you tell me what the mood was? Obviously, on the E&E, everybody's fearful but doing their job. Is there? I listen to the stories, and it seems situation after situation where you're facing imminent death, or this is beyond what the day-to-day combat was when you're firing artillery, this or that. You're in extraordinary situations. Was there a sense of panic, or was there a sense of that fear that came out, or was it very much, here's what we need to do, we go and do it? And just trying to get beyond just the recount of the events and a sense of what the mood was like, or what the feeling was like among the men.
Well, recognize again that I'm there the first day,
right,
and I'm there the last day, and the last day we leave. So I really can't speak to anything that went on in the interim there, but my sense when I came back was, the people were tired, but there was still a strong sense of, we're doing all right, we're going to do this, among all of the troops there. I understand there's some people that were major afraid, but can't fault them for that.
right.
Overall, I had the sense that when I came back that the unit was still pretty well together. I'd heard that someone had accidentally shot another soldier, and that Tex Rogers had dropped some guy who ran around the corner of his bunker, an NVA guy, and things like that. But I didn't get any sense that people were not willing to continue to do whatever they needed to do.
Right. So in the face of all this happening, I mean, it held together. fairly well.
Optimism, yeah, I think
Right.
the optimism was there that we got a chance. We have all this air support, and we got the Sigis and Albright and Pirelli, and yeah, this thing is doable. Daunting, but doable.
Right. Right.
And the whole leaving the fire base was a spooky part, because you have that initial deal where you think that they probably know you're going to leave, and they're in the jungle already. Now you're going in the jungle,
wait
and
for
you
it.
got to cross this open area in order to get there.
Right.
Once I was in the jungle, I felt much better, because at least you're as hidden as they are
Right,
for a little
sure.
while. So.
Yeah. What then? After you said you were, when you reached Buprang, then you were choppered off somewhere else. What did the rest of your tour entail?
Hey, the rest of my tour, so I go back to battalion, and they brought the rest of they sent a Chinook out for the rest of the troops. Now, again, I don't know why the colonel takes me in a chopper, but he did, and the rest of the troops came by other means there, a Chinook or two, I suppose. And they gave us a week off. Stand down is the terminology. So they gave us a week stand down in Pleiku while we got new guns and new equipment. And within a week, everybody's bored stiff. So, I mean, you're there to do something, not to just sit around.
Right.
It was fun being able to go to the O Club and the NCO Club and that sort of stuff. But after a while, you're ready to get back to business.
So were you involved in other combat situations before?
Yeah, I'd have to look at my hat downstairs
Yeah.
to see which ones. I have my old camouflage thing there with the fire bases written around the top of it there. John Kerr and I wound up on another fire base together, Dory, which was, again, another one of those deals. It was a beautiful fire base, but nothing ever happened. We didn't do anything. We just sat there and made sure things were pretty.
Right. You had mentioned the setup of the fire bases, like Kate and Annie and some of the others were within range of each other for support. Was there a lot of support during this event at Kate from the other fire bases, or had they already fallen, or?
No, they hadn't fallen. Most of the support we got was after I left. I understand there was some from Susan and Annie, but one of them was almost out. It was almost out of their range fans, and you ran the risk of dropping around on somebody if you're too far out of the range fan, the probable air. But with so much air support, choppers and jets, and there was an Arclight, a B-52 strike in the area, Spookies, SPAD things, all sorts of aircraft, everybody blowing them away is incredible support. So there wasn't that much need for artillery support.
Right. That arc light sounds amazing. Were you there for that?
I don't think so. I was in an area where one was, and they call it Rolling Thunder, and that's what it sounds like. So.
I can imagine.
Yeah.
That's basically what I wanted to cover with you. I would ask you if there's any events that took place, any people that, names didn't come up that you think should, anything you want to add, just so, this is your chance to chime in where maybe I don't know enough to ask about something.
Well, I think John Kerr, all things considered, did a hell of a job, and to be under those circumstances and then suffer the loss of another officer, and then Maurice Zollner to get thrown into that. We'll talk about out of the frying pan into the fire. I regret that he's doesn't wish to participate, but that's his decision. I only knew him for a short period of time, but he was a good man. He did his job. And the troops, overall, troops were great.
What was the reaction when you came back? Were they surprised or glad or no reaction or?
No, I think they were surprised because it might have actually seemed kind of stupid to them.
Yeah.
Why would you come back to
Anybody
this?
say
But-
that to you? What the hell are you doing?
Someone may have. It's been so long, I just no longer remember. But I don't remember them Well, surprise, I suppose, was the collective feeling. But I like to think also it was appreciated. So, and I felt a lot better about it. And after I saw what was going on, I began to have my own doubts. But at least you're with your guys. It's kind of a team thing. So.
Right.
And there were
Right.
some great troops.
I may have interrupted you. I didn't know if you were going to say something else there, and I jumped in. but-
No,
Okay.
no. They were great troops, and still are, I suppose. I wish we'd have done all this about 25, 30 years ago when I could still remember things.
Does it get talked about much? Or not so much? As you look back over the last 40 years, is it just kind of something that happened then and you left it there, or?
I was really surprised, I suppose, because I came home one day and there's a message on my machine there from the sheriff's office. So, of course, you instantly think, what'd I do? So I called him up, and the deputy says, "Now you're not in trouble. You didn't do anything." Says, "There's a congressman trying to get a hold of you from Illinois." And it was Ken and Congressman Schilling, and they were putting Bill Albright in for the Silver Star. So he explained what was going on, and that's the first contact I'd had with anybody about that portion of Vietnam in 45 years.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
I came back, when you come back from Nam, I went to Germany and I commanded a Honest John nuclear unit for 2 years, and then I was a re-enlistment officer in Frankfurt, Germany for a year. Came back to DIO in Fort Riley, Kansas for 2 years. My wife and I saved money and started out raising our kids there, and so we could save and build this house, and left that and went into civilian life, and the years just flowed by.
Right.
And then suddenly out of the blue, here's this deal about Kate.
The other thing that kind of surprises me just a little bit, because I hear, the stories of things that happened there and that, but almost to a man, everybody says, it was what it was, but I wouldn't have changed the experience. I mean, when you look back on it, was it something, as you look at your life, hey, that was an experience that changed me and I'm glad I was there? Or, do you ever think about that?
No, if anything, it heightened my appreciation for being alive. So.
Yeah, I imagine it would.
The Grim Reaper was closer than you'd like for him to be. So I think overall it just made me appreciate life a lot more, appreciate what I have. And
Yeah.
I wish perhaps I'd stayed in touch with some of those folks, but when you look back on military service from an officer enlisted standpoint, you can't, nor should you, be buddy-buddy with each other. The system just doesn't tolerate that very well,
Right.
both functionally and realistically. So you tend to, even though like Terry Malvestuto, I tried to look him up, 30 years later. I was passing through Chicago, and his name was Malvestuto, and we talked about Chicago and the usual stuff, and so I tried to phone him up, and by then he'd already died. So,
Yeah.
and he was a NCO, but he walked off. He was in the rear with me of the artillery guys.
Okay.
He had a little grenade launcher with him, and I don't know, chatting and making jokes and that sort of stuff with each other. But enlisted and officers, there's a natural separation that wouldn't lead to a long-term
Right.
friendship, I don't think. And then the officers, over the years, it just disappears.
Right. And through this process, have you gotten back in touch or met up with guys that maybe you hadn't seen since then? Or?
I've corresponded with Klaus Adam a few times, and with John Kerr, but not so much. Well, Ken Hopkins. Ken sent me a nice note not too long ago. Again, he was enlisted, and at the time I was involved with Ken Hopkins, I think he was a Spec 4 or so, and he tended to go against the grain. He wore some goofy little necklace, like kids would do nowadays to rebel against authority. Then Ken at least from my perspective, seemed to like to give the impression that he was against this authority, and he's kind of a surfer dude, as I understand. So.
Yeah.
But he was a decent soldier. So, 45 years later, don't remember much.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's all I've got for you. You know, I appreciate your time and certainly appreciate your service and, you know, your willingness to share the story. So, unless you have anything else, I'll turn off the lights and get you out of the hot seat.
Well, I hope John Kerr's upgrade goes through, and it'd be nice they gave one to Maurice also, and with any luck, Bill's upgrade will also happen. So, so it's a pretty unique thing what he did at his age and given the circumstances.
Right.
Unfortunately, well, I hope it happens, but I don't know if it will or not. He probably knows more about it than I do, being involved in politics.
Right. Yep. Yeah. Once it goes into the politics, and who knows.
And the medal situation, the military being the military, they react quickly. Most of the medals were given on what's called an impact award. Something happens, and instead of doing the paperwork and it taking months to wind its way through somewhere, some general flies out and starts pinning medals on everybody.
Immediately.
And that's what happened to us. And yeah, they tend to look around and say, well, the officers, enlisted, NCOs, you know, they tend to piece things out like that unless there's a distinct difference. So I don't think I did any more than anybody else, but being an officer, I got a higher medal than many of them.
What medal did you receive there?
Silver Star.
And that was in country. That was the impact.
That was about 2-3 days later
Oh, okay.
in Pleiku,
Okay.
as did many of the troops. But again, there was that separation of, it was if this is how we award them
This
based
is your
on
rank. This is the medal.
based
you
on
get.
command. But it's not hard to. I can understand how the Army does that. I mean, the responsibilities of an officer are far different from a gunner, a cannon cocker, a guy whose job is to stick the shell in the breech. Has a little bit different view of the world and view of his responsibilities than does an officer who's in charge of the entire outfit. So,
Right.
but those things lead to resentment. I hope none of them do resent it all that much. But
Right. Yeah, and you know, honestly, I haven't talked to people too much about the award ceremony and things that happen, and there's different accounts where Bill Albrecht didn't attend that impact ceremony for one reason or another and missed out on a medal, and now they're trying to get that. I mean, is there, you know, whether it be Bill Albrecht or somebody else, you mentioned, you know, unless somebody had done something above and beyond that stands out. I mean, is he in that role? Is anybody on Kate in that role in your eyes that, hey, they did something that was above and beyond that deserves special recognition?
oh, I think John Kerr and probably Maurice Zollner both, given the level of responsibility, and it's not just blazing away with your M16. Given the level of responsibility and the time period that they had to do that, staying awake and the pressure of all that and the pressure of the responsibility. Yeah, I think both of them deserve an upgrade. They can downgrade mine and give it to them if they want. So. There was something else I was going to say here, but well, can't remember.
That's fine. Well, that's all I've got. So, unless you come up with something else there, and about the awards or individuals, John Kerr or Zollner, or that's
Well,
what we were talking
I think it was
about.
more like the awards thing. That thing with the colonel still bugs me after all these years. The deal, artillerymen have been found dead next to their cannons.
Right.
And you want to say, we ain't finding this one. So what I was thinking of is that it has to do with what they now call the fog of war.
Right.
Something goes down and somehow or another it gets either screwed up or turned around or whatever. So in this situation, whenever we left Cape, and I go back to Pleiku, to the headquarters, somewhere in between Kate happening and me getting back there, they named a fire base Mike Smith. And that's supposedly named after me. And I think what happened was in this fog of war, I was on Kate, I got wounded and left. Ron Ross came into Kate, he got killed. The colonel in charge of the operation, he had been out to the fire base a time or two, and I got the sense that he liked the fire base, he liked the way it was organized, the way it was neat, and it was neat and clean, and we kept things as they should be. And so I got the sense that he kind of liked me. Okay, so now you fast forward and somebody is killed, somebody is wounded, and he hears that I'm killed, so the next fire base they put in to support this whole operation of boot praying was called Mike Smith.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So I can see how that could aggravate someone, saying, damn, the guy wasn't even there. But it was just one of those quirks. It probably should have been Firebase Ron Ross.
Oh, right, yeah.
The way things went down, but once it's written up on the wall, it's there.
Right.
So I told one of the pilots that. I said, yeah, I think it was supposed to be named for the other guy, but they got it after me. And he said, well, go with it.
Yeah. And that happened while you were still in country? So,
Yeah.
So you were aware of that?
Yeah,
Hey, they
yeah.
just named a fire base after you?
Yeah.
Oh.
So kind of strange, but you can see how it might create some resentment. And it's
Right.
all, I just think, just error, just simple error.
Right.
And then I think Bill explained it, or somebody explained it, Marvin, that they look at the name on the roster of the unit and go, okay, that guy, the platoon leader was killed, there he is, Mike Smith. We're going to call this fire base Mike Smith.
Oh, right, right.
But I didn't do it, and I can't undo it. So
You didn't? Did anybody give you a hard time when you were
no,
there?
no, I don't remember that. But just a strange quirk of war.
You never got assigned to that base?
I flew through it.
Oh,
yeah.
you did?
Yeah, I passed through it at one point, but
That would have been a little strange.
of course they didn't have a big sign up or anything. You just knew on the map that was
Right.
this or that fire base.
Right.
But all the fire bases I was on, in terms of a place where you felt like it was a good fire base, that was one, because we were right on top of that hill. Some of the descriptions that I've read, they talk about them being able to fire down on us, and I don't think so. I'll show you the picture here in a little bit.
Yeah, I'd like
I
to
don't
see
think
that.
anybody was firing down on us.
Okay.
It was definitely an outpost, a classic little outpost. Short of the Ambush Hill thing, where they were talking about us being fired down on, didn't happen.
Okay.